Just like to move on now to James Branley, who has been a senior doctor here at Nepean Hospital for many years. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Kim. And if I can also pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past and present from the Darug land. And David, thanks for your words, and Uncle Harold, thank you also for your words. I'm a bit of a newbie to this area, and I guess my story probably starts really when I came to the Blue Mountains 15 years ago, and started living up in that Hazelbrook area, which I guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, Darug and Gundungurra country, perhaps an intertribal area. But I guess I became fascinated, and if you go to Hazelbrook and you see the roadworks, they put the highway up there, and in the 1960s there was a series of Aboriginal wells on that high ridge country running through Hazelbrook. Big, deep, water-holding stones that really had very big pools in them, and these were man-made, or women-made, I'm not sure. But these were made, and in about 1965 or 67 or somewhere when they were widening the highway, the RTA, or the equivalent at the time, chose in their wisdom to put a highway over them. So there were something like 60 wells at that site, and fortunately you can still see a few wells on the side of the highway there. And in fact, when the recent work was done on the highway, and I suggest anyone who drives up that way have a look, because you'll notice the footpath veers out and goes on a little roundabout, and the reason for that, I probably need to credit Father Eugene Stockton from Lawson, who has spent a lifetime studying anthropology and archaeology, and in fact the find you referred to at Cranebrook, I think, was one of Eugene's finds, and he did a lot of the work with that, and has done a lot of work with Aboriginal people in this part of the world, but also in the northwest of WA. And I got to know Eugene and talked through some of the issues there, and started my journey sort of learning a little bit. Luckily, Eugene was able to persuade the RTA to not cover up the remaining 6 or 8 wells and some axe grinding grooves that are in the stone at that site. And I guess from my perspective, coming as a white guy, you know, we're very familiar with the concepts of patriotism and love of country. But I guess white guys tend to express it a little bit differently, and sometimes that's not always expressed with the best of intentions. What my journey to understanding a little bit, a tiny bit, about Indigenous relationship to land and the passion and the spirituality of land, I think is the good side of the same sentiment of love of country and patriotism. And I think that's been wonderful for me to be able to walk through the bush, beautiful World Heritage bush up there, and appreciate that you're walking through a 22,000, 40,000, 50,000 year old gallery, workshop, spiritual site, whatever it happens to be. And I guess personally I'd like to respect that tradition and respect those sites that are still there, and the evidence of that prolonged occupation of country. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that, and I hope my words are not in any way offensive. But look, I want to sort of change tack now, because in the year 2000, after the push into East Timor was on, I joined the RAAF, I joined the Air Force, and I guess we're all very familiar with the Anzac Day ceremonies of April 25. And I guess in the last year or so, it's been really rewarding to see that some of the Indigenous diggers have been recognised, and you know, well over 400. 400 is the number that's used, but I'm sure it was much more than 400 diggers joined the first AIF. And as Uncle Harold said, these people weren't Australians at the time. They weren't regarded as Australians. They clearly were Australians. They joined, they fought for country, and they were probably treated better in the military sense in some ways, even though there wasn't equality. And there were some positive experiences out of that terrible time. World War II also, 3,000 Indigenous diggers or even more. And I want to highlight one, Flight Sergeant Len Waters, who came from the country up around Moree, up around the Queensland border, Moree, St George type area. And he joined, at the start of World War II, Indigenous people weren't able to join the military. And pretty soon they were losing so many aircrew that the Air Force actually said, well, we'll let them join the Air Force. So the Air Force was the first service that allowed Indigenous people to join them officially, and Len Waters joined and became a fighter pilot. And he's the only Indigenous fighter pilot, and flew over 90 missions throughout Indonesia and Borneo, right up to the end of the war. And interestingly, the war finished, and he went back to being a shearer, I think, in Cunnamulla, and returned to his previous life. So I guess those are just a couple of little reflections for me on the importance. And really, what does reconciliation mean to me? It means to me that white fellas and black fellas look at what unites them, and what unites them is much, much more strong than what divides them. And I think we need to focus on our commonality as humans. And how do we know when we've reached a destination? We know when we've reached that destination because the statistics of health will mirror each other. The statistics of black fella and white fella will be the same. And we haven't got to that point yet, and we need to all really work hard to try and improve the gap in life expectancy, in childhood mortality, in incarceration figures, and in social deprivation figures. So that's what it means to me, and I look forward to a day where First Australians and other Australians truly are equal.